When I first started playing Dungeons & Dragons, and even when I first heard of the hobby, I immediately knew I wanted to be the DM, in control of the adventure, guiding the players through. As I started playing for the first time, we had lots of scheduling issues like many groups have, but I was hooked and wanted more. So with about 1 or 2 sessions under my belt, I went to a Discord I had never spoken in before and made a post saying, "Hey guys, I want to run a game." Now, statistically, or at least according to r/RPG horror stories, this should have ended very badly. But somehow everything went great, and we've been running an almost weekly game for about 5 years now. Though I now had a group of people who I had fun playing with and could make it every week, I ran into a new problem. I had no idea how to come up with a story for the next, well, we started level 2, so 18 levels. That's why I wanted to make my first video about how to structure a D&D game and how to do it in a way where your players still have a lot of freedom, but you can also plan ahead. Hello there everyone, my name is Slumpert, and in this video I want to go over a couple of video games and how I think you can take inspiration from their design for your tabletop RPGs. I'm going to use Dungeons & Dragons for my examples, but I think these tips should be useful for other tabletop RPGs as well. Now, little disclaimer, I haven't used anything from this video specifically. I was just talking with some friends on how I went about structuring games and thought maybe I could try and share this. First off, I want to talk about Breath of the Wild because that's the game that sparked this whole video. For context, I recently started a new campaign where the players are exploring a mysterious island trying to find some other explorers who have disappeared. In session 1, they found some information about the area, and as they traveled further in session 2, they immediately found the lair of the Big Bad. A huge fortress full of demons way above their level. They haven't been spotted by demons yet, but trying to get in would be suicide. After the session, the players asked me, "Wait, how are we supposed to do this? We can't take them on." And they're right. But in that first session and a little bit in the second session, they had been doing a great job of looking for information. They had noticed an area near the fortress that the demons avoided. They also know there are a lot of people throughout the island who are looking for the missing explorers as well, and they might be willing to help them. We spoke about it and I knew they all know of Breath of the Wild, so I said it's similar to that. You know where the Big Bad is, you can fight him anytime you want. It's up to you to find the right tools and the right allies to take them on. And so the adventure becomes looking for allies, looking for magic items to help defeat that huge demon fortress they found. So as DM, you can start with thinking of your Big Bad. Who are they? What do they want? And how are they going to get it? When you have an idea of your Big Bad, you can start thinking of who would try to stop them and maybe some artifacts or magical items that could be relevant to their plot. Then you probably also want a hook, which for those of you who don't know is a reason or an event for the players to engage with the plot. As a side note, I usually come up with a couple of Big Bads and corresponding hooks, and then I pitch the hooks to the players in session 0 and let them choose which adventure to go for. That way everyone knows what kind of campaign they are making characters for, but it's technically not relevant to this video. When the game starts, you can have the hook lead directly to the Big Bad. The travel between can still take some time, but the point is to let the players directly know who the Big Bad is and where to find them. If the players get spotted by the Big Bad for whatever reason, it's important to remember that at least for now, they are beneath their notice. They probably wouldn't even be bothered dealing with some random adventures by themselves. Or you can just have a TPK, that's fine too. I think that works really well, at least for me. I know where I put different allies and items, but if the players themselves are clever and come up with something, I can add it in later. At the same time, it's still very easy for me to plan ahead and see what the players want to do and how they want to do that. So I think it's a bit of work to set things up as a DM, but once you've done so, the session-to-session preparation should be a lot easier, which will be a theme for this video. The second game I want to talk about is Subnautica. I first dismissed it because even though it's a great game, the story of Subnautica plays out very start-stop. It's pretty linear, which both aren't great for tabletop RPGs. But then I started thinking about my first campaign and how I planned that one out, and I think it was actually pretty similar. The way I had laid out the campaign was kind of like a string of events that slowly led to the Big Bad's attempt at taking over the world. The players had a lot of freedom in between. They decided how to respond to events or how to prepare for what they thought could happen next. And gradually they found out more and more about what was going on with the plot. The one thing to pay attention to is to give the players a good idea of where to go or where the next thing might happen. Or be like me and be ready to improvise a lot. Actually, thinking about it, you need to be ready to improvise a lot anyway, so forget that. Just make sure to listen to what the players think is going on and don't forget to sprinkle in little bits of lore every now and again. Even though the story in Subnautica is linear, that's just a story written by the developers. There is not a story in the game. The story of the player gathering their courage and approaching the Aurora, knowing it is guarded by Reaper Leviathans. Or the player getting frustrated after being teleported out of their prawn suit and dying. It's a story that happens during gameplay while the player is free to explore. I think that's a very important part of tabletop RPGs, and I think it's often overlooked when people talk about interactive stories in general. It's probably because it's hard to prepare for. We'll talk about it more with our next game.
Hey, you're finally awake.
Skyrim, because its story might not be very interesting, but it's all about the story the players make for themselves while they are exploring the world. I think it's a great example of just giving the players a bunch of stuff to play with and see what they want to do. The world is basically a sandbox where the developers have dotted around a bunch of potentially fun or interesting places or quests and organizations, and it's up to the players to decide what they want. I wouldn't do this with end of the world stuff, because when something is threatening the literal end of the world, you probably should be chasing that, and you don't end up having a lot of freedom, or at least it wouldn't feel like that to your players. Unless you take it like actual Skyrim and just pause the end of the world while the players dig around, but I think for immersion's sake, you probably want to go with a smaller scope setting. Maybe you play in a city and you have a Thieves Guild and a Mage Guild and several noble houses, and all of them are up to something. Which ones do the players dislike? They can be the villains. Which ones do they not care about? You can just ignore them. Which ones do they agree with? You can let them ally with those. One of the great things about this way of preparing is once the players decide who they don't like, then all the other factions suddenly become potential allies, or at least interested parties. This is of course after you've done a lot of work to set everything up. You need to come up with all these factions that all want something and they all have opinions about each other, but you can cheat a little bit on that too. Way to both do less work and have your players be more engaged with the story. All it will cost you is a little bit of creative control. You can add the different groups, factions or people mentioned in your players' backstories to the groups you've already made. During your session 0 you can even mention something like, this campaign is going to play out mostly in this city, so if you want your backstory to be important to the plot, make sure it somehow relates to the city. Remember, these factions don't have to be actually from the city, they just have to have some interest in the city. The next game I want to talk about are kind of two games. That's because I originally thought of this in Kingdom Hearts, but then I realized Pokemon Mystery Dungeon also works for this, and it has, in my opinion, a much better story. Instead of having one larger campaign with a continuous storyline, you can have multiple smaller adventures with their own self-contained stories. I think this could work well if you're playing as a group of pirates traveling from island to island, or maybe a group of mercenaries fulfilling different contracts or anything similar. Now, Mystery Dungeon and Kingdom Hearts both have an overarching story that's even the story I was just talking about, but I think that's optional. You can have a lot of fun with a group of players doing smaller adventures, especially if you don't play very regularly and it's difficult for players to remember everything that happened between sessions. I think of all of these, this one requires the least amount of work for the DM, though you'd have to do it over and over again, whereas with the others you do a lot of work in the beginning and then you don't have to do as much session to session. This one is kind of the opposite. I have two more quick ones. I think Hades could work for a game where death doesn't matter. Maybe if you really like dungeon crawls but don't want to deal with dying and having to make a new character over and over again, I think you could make something happen. If you try, make sure to, of course, communicate with your players so everybody knows they might die a lot. And lastly, Silent Hill 1 is really only on here because while I was writing the script I had a Just Drive Haze video about Silent Hill on my other monitor, and I thought this sounds great for a Call of Cthulhu game. I imagine you start with unfamiliar things like a laboratory or an asylum, places that you in real life don't really know. And then as the game progresses you go to more familiar things. For example, you start a session in a village and you establish a normal day-to-day for all your players. Then things happen, and as they go investigate, they first go to a laboratory where they find the aftermath of an experiment gone wrong, but nothing paranormal yet. Then they go back, maybe to a hospital, to talk with some of the people who got hurt in the experiment, where things slowly start turning paranormal, turning a little bit weird, and from there keep leading the players to places that should feel more safe, should feel more normal, but then instead things keep getting weirder and more dangerous. Think it could work? Maybe? I don't know, we'll see next time I run a game. Anyways, that's just some ideas I had. I hope they're helpful. Let me know what you think. If you have any other games you think would be a good fit for tabletop RPGs to take inspiration from, let me know too. Thank you for watching and bye! Bye!